Thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for your presentations and for being with us this morning. My question is for you, Mr. Hines. So in your submission to the task force, you recommended the government should delay legalization until experts agree on an established definition of marijuana impairment, and that the technology exists to test for impairment to this standard in a proven and reliable manner. And my question for you is, do you still recommend delayed legalization? Do you think employers are prepared for addressing impairment in the workplace after legalization?
So to the second part, I would say employers are not fully prepared because of what I alluded to in my comments around a real lack of understanding of what the rules are. And certainly the jurisprudence points in a whole bunch of different directions. So it's not really as simple as pointing back to one Supreme Court decision and saying, okay, well, now we understand the rules of the game, let's proceed. It's fair to say that we do not really have a clear understanding of the way forward. I think the testing, we wrote that submission almost 2 years ago. The testing has actually come a long ways since we wrote that submission. And to the point my colleague made earlier, the Toronto Transit Commission has rolled out a program only recently. They have some testing tools they are using, which they believe, and their experts will confirm, are pretty close to pointing to impairment, a likely impairment, and use within the last limited number of hours before the saliva was actually collected. So we're feeling more confident that the tools have come along. Could we be further along? Of course we could. We're not quite at where we are with the alcohol testing, so there's still more work to be done. But we certainly think there are tools out there that could be used in the event that we were able to roll out testing in a more comprehensive and coordinated way.
I see Mr. Elliott looking. I'm wondering if you wanted to respond to that as well.
I would certainly agree with Mr. Hines on what he's saying as far as the progress on testing. We as Energy Safety Canada are just completing work with the Construction Owners Association of Alberta to create the Canada model for alcohol and drug programs. We create a standard model that then all of our member companies or anyone can pick it up off the websites and use it to build their own drug and alcohol programs. And it's about managing impairment in the workplace. So people can put the right things in place to effectively manage most of the risk. But as we've stated, the challenge is we don't have all the tools. The testing is great, but the additional benefits of random testing would be very helpful.
So do I have a few more minutes here?
Yes,
No,
you
thank
do.
you. Great.
And by the way, if anybody, other witnesses want to comment, just signal to me, and if it comes within the 5 minutes and it's agreed to by the senator who has the 5 minutes, then we just signal to me
Okay.
or to the senator.
Great.
And we work you in.
Thanks.
But
Thank you, Chair.
You've still got some time.
Thank you, Chair. So we heard about safety-sensitive employment, and as a Canadian, I appreciate that. You know, I fly in a plane and I'm on a train and I drive a car on the road and there are trucks around me, and so I'm sure all Canadians can relate to the membership that that you represent. And so I'm particularly now interested in this legislated fitness for duty framework. And the fact that you said that Canada is not in line with many other jurisdictions around the world, including Great Britain, the United States, and Australia. So why is it, in fact, that we don't have rules so that employers have some ability to do this and to ascertain that there isn't a lack of safety on the part of their employees, for whom they may be in the end responsible or liable, in fact? Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to take that
Yeah.
question, Senator, and thanks very much. It's a really good question you're asking. And we're asking the same question. So as an example, my organization, we've been doing alcohol and drug testing since 1995 because we're cross-border trucking operations. The United States has done a full suite of how they deal with this situation. So the airline pilots and the train drivers and the truck drivers. It's no different than in the UK, and it's no different than in many other places. And just so you understand the significance in my mind of this issue is that in 2015, 10 pilots in the United States had positive alcohol tests. Right? So it doesn't sound like a whole lot. But it happens. And in India, where they test the entire flight crew before every flight, so the entire flight crew, so you know you're going to be tested, they had 43. So it happens. And so once again, for us, it's a preventive measure. It's a check and balance. All the stats back up that deterrence works. Is it perfect? Is it going to cut it to nothing? No, that's not going to happen. But it works. It dramatically works. There's some stats that I won't refer to that are in our document that clearly talk about a study that was done in the United States after they introduced their whole suite of testing programs, where the numbers went dramatically down. And so we're asking the same question. We agree that the increased use of marijuana is one aspect here. But as Mr. Moore says, we're already dealing with a problem. And we need to address the problem, and the problem's only going to get worse. And the best way to address the problem, in our mind, is to have a full suite of testing that's used as a deterrent.
Okay.
Your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I'm going to insert one question in here that follows up on this whole theme. One of the things that we've been told by some medical experts and scientists and researchers in all of this is that cannabis, unlike alcohol, the THC level can remain in the system for maybe weeks, and that there is not an indication, you could detect this, but there's not an indication that in fact the person is impaired. And you've indicated, and others have indicated, that the science on the testing isn't exactly the best. So how can you justify random testing on that basis? So I'd like your answer to that, and I'd like to hear from the Labour Congress as well.
Great question. And certainly we've seen some developments in this space which are positive in getting a better understanding of confirming the level of impairment. And we spoke earlier about the very recent evidence in the policy being rolled out at the Toronto Transit Commission. So they're medical experts who have spoken on the record in front of, I think, arbitrators, maybe judges, have actually acknowledged they believe that the positive test that emerges from their test related to marijuana does indicate likely impairment because it's use that will have occurred within the previous, I want to say the numbers are 4 to 6 hours, but I'll have to come back with you on the exact numbers there. But because it is so close to the actual consumption, their experts would say they believe there is a level of impairment there that would inhibit a person's ability to do their work safely, to be fit for work.
Okay, Mr. Yusuf.
First and foremost, there's no agreements on the science on this at this stage. Everybody will cite some reference that they would like to support their position. There's no agreement on the science. And it's just not me saying that. I think if you speak to the scientific community, they'll tell you the same thing. The reality is, if you're going to use a particular method to determine someone's ability to their employment, I think you better be certain because you're dealing with their livelihood. It is clear that with the legalization of recreational cannabis that we need to do more education to ensure the current rules as they are does not permit a worker to come to work impaired, whether it's alcohol, whether it's cannabis, or any other drugs for that matter. Those rules have not changed and will not change as a result of this legislation. So it's critical that we understand the context in which we're dealing. We have, of course, a jurisprudence before us by the Supreme Court of Canada. It's the highest authority in this country that had the ability to determine the legality of an employer-imposed drug and alcohol testing, and the Supreme Court has said this is unwarranted and unjustified. However, they did agree there are circumstances in which you can introduce it, providing, of course, you can demonstrate that there's enough evidence to do so. All of the studies that my friends have cited here is American study. And, of course, the American approach to this issue is fundamentally different than we have done in Canada. Of course, arbitrators have ruled. Some workplaces are currently, of course, introducing policy which are before the courts and before arbitrators, and we're litigating them. We'll end up back at the Supreme Court. Most recently, one of our, of course, employers in Alberta, Suncor, introduced. The courts, of course, have struck down their unilateral decision to impose such imposition on workers. And now I assume the Supreme Court eventually will hear that case again, but essentially right now we do have a jurisprudence. We work very diligently to ensure health and safety of workers and work with employer in a very diligent way to ensure our workplaces are safe. I think there need to be a recognition that just because there is the legalization of recreational cannabis does not change the responsibility of workers in regard to coming to work, of course, fit for duty. And in that context, that's been the rule and the law currently in this country.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to